Yes, indeed, folks, it is in the Blue Please right here on CynicalBrits.com with myself, Total Biscuit. Ghostcrawler said something. Rage! God. Now, you know how I like to do this show, yeah? I like to do this. Thanks, Chaos Smurf. It didn't work. That was a little bit of reverse psychology going on there in my inbox. Don't read this one. Did it work? Hip, dip, hip. Yes. Quite. Evil bastard. Right. So you know how I like to roll things on the show, which is I don't like to pre-read stuff like this, because I prefer the rage to be completely, I wouldn't say unprovoked, but unprepared. It's wonderful, wonderful things that you're able to do with that kind of thing. It's first impressions content. It's like WTF is. It's the same as that. So, if I hear that Ghostcrawler said something, I don't pre-read it at all. I want to experience it firsthand and share it with you on the show in the medium of shouting. And you know what? Most of the time it works pretty well. Like, I am fairly angry that my... Oh, my GG button's working again. Fantastic. Damn it! What if I keep holding this down? It's getting faster and faster, isn't it? This is going to explode right now. How fast can this go? It's a helicopter. Fantastic. Yeah. It's some avant-garde French rap right here. Okay, enough of that. Thank you very much. Oh, well. Oh, well. Okay, so this one is about the raid progress. And I've been talking about that really for the last week and a bit. It's been on Azeroth Daily, it's been on Blue Please. So, just bear that in mind, folks. There may be blood. Now, Ghostcrawler has really stopped posting on the forums almost entirely and is now posting on the blogs, on Battle.net, where he has time to prepare and where he's not answering silly questions. I'm okay with that. So, we're going to go through this and we're going to figure out exactly what he's saying and what is right and what is wrong. So I'm fairly sure it was the lyrics of the last song that we actually turned up, but there you go. Okay. Here we go. We addressed our views on dungeon difficulty several weeks ago, and in the interim, many players have asked us to comment on raid difficulty. I chose to use the word progress in the title for this blog quite intentionally. We think that progress is the key to players having fun. When groups stop making progress, the members become frustrated. When individuals feel like they are stuck, that's when they start to lose interest. I don't think it strictly has to do with the flow of loot being shut off. A part of it is the sense that as you climb up the mountain, you're getting closer and closer to the summit, instead of just sliding back down to base camp at the end of each day. Let's consider two extremes. If you complete the raid content very quickly and have Sinestro on farm and everyone has acquired their best in slot, then you're probably ready to take a break from raiding. If you worked really hard to get to that point, as many of the current finished guilds did, then you're probably pretty happy about resting until Firelands becomes available. However, if that breakpoint happens too soon, too easily for too many guilds, then the raiding game can feel empty. Players run out of content before they are ready to run out of content, if that makes sense. Well, yeah, it does. It was... Let's see, the first 6 months of Wrath, as I recall, was exactly like that. Sadly. Content. Dip-de-dip-de-dip. Oh, we're done in 3 days. That was when all of the content was cleared, folks. 3 days. How long did it take for Cataclysm? Much bloody longer. Simple as that. It took longer than 3 days just to clear the normal mode, so, you know, they did a much better job there. However, the risk is, of course, that... Funnily enough, that mountain analogy comes back in, and we were reaching the apex of glorious raiding heaven, and it seems to me that we might be slipping right down to the base camp of Wrath of the Lich King once again. Therein lies the problem with that. See that analogy? It's a nice analogy you have there. It would be a shame if I were to steal it. Now, let's continue with that. I agree with pretty much everything you said so far, because it's based on everything they did wrong in the last 3 years. Now, let's consider the other extreme, where a guild just has no realistic chance of ever beating a boss. This can be particularly demoralizing if it's the final boss, but it can happen at any time. That guild might not feel like they're making progress. Many guilds are willing to put in a few months trying to master a new encounter, but if it gets to the point where you're wiping for months, there's a good chance they'll start to see burnout and thinning ranks. The sweet spot in raid balance for us is to hit that everyone feels like they can still make progress. Content that is too hard or too easy doesn't meet that goal. Okay, that goal is impossible. I'm sorry, it is. It is absolutely and totally and completely impossible. There are too many guilds and too few difficulty levels to make that even remotely feasible. I'd like to say that it was feasible, but I'm also a firm believer in not having to beat a game in order to get enough value out of it to justify playing it. This is particularly true for me because I'm very much... I have gamer ADHD, let's be honest. I flip from game to game to game, and I don't spend a lot of time really on any of them. And a lot of people would turn around and say, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, say Bulletstorm, I haven't finished it yet. I just haven't got around to it. I played about 6 hours of it, so I'm fairly close to the end. But I don't really feel the need to finish it. I could if I wanted, but I feel like I got enough enjoyment out of it to justify it. And a lot of people might turn around and say, well, that's ridiculous, because that's quite an expensive game. Well, one, I got a review copy, and two, honestly, I don't really have a problem with getting copies of games anymore, and I have quite a large games collection, so often I will just flip through games, and I don't really care. It sort of consists of my sole entertainment, so to me, it might seem like a lot of money to a lot of people, but it's very subjective, isn't it? Whereas WoW, you get such a lot of value out of it that I don't even know why people argue that it's not worth the money. I suppose the only way they could argue that it wasn't worth the money is if the time that they spent wasn't actually of high value. Wasn't particularly enjoyable, wasn't high quality time spent. Because you can have time spent in a game and think, oh well, was this really, really good time? I mean, for instance, the 6 hours of Bulletstorm I played were some of the best single-player FPS I've played in years. I'm trying to think of one recently that was any good. Let's have a think. Nope, can't think of anything. I'm sorry, I can't. I can't think of any recent single-player FPS that I've really, really enjoyed. I think probably the last one that I really got a lot of fun out of was Bioshock 2, but that maybe lasted me about 5 or 6 hours until I got sick of the mechanics. The original Bioshock, certainly, an awful lot of time spent in that one. But in reality, a lot of the time spent in games like WoW isn't actually quality time. However, you could still argue that WoW provides exceptional value for money, even if you don't beat all the content. And this is why I think it's okay to have hard content that people can't feasibly beat. Ghostcrawler does not believe that is the case. Unfortunately, what Ghostcrawler seems to fail to realize is that if he wants that dream to become even close to being a reality, you need more than easy and hard modes. Because that's what it is right now. I mean, normal modes are certainly harder now, but you know for a fact that it's going to turn out to be significantly easier as we go through. You know how it's going to go, folks. And that's how Wrath was for 2 years, pretty much. If you want to be all things to all men, which is what WoW has been trying to do now for 6 years, and for a reasonable amount of the content has actually succeeded in doing, you have to realize one inescapable truth. That people are not going to beat everything, and that's okay. However, if you want a lot of people to beat content and see content and actually feel satisfied with it, then you need to look at how your difficulty system is set up. Specifically, we're talking about the idea that if you have just easy and hard modes, then you're going to have guys, they get through the easy mode, and then they hit a brick wall with the heroics, etc. Now, in theory, that's okay, but right now, with the way that it's set up, it's more like sort of normal and hard mode, which, to me, I'm okay with that, but a lot of people aren't. And the reason for that is that you've now got people getting stuck on normal mode content, and the normal mode content then gets repeatedly nerfed and things like that. And you're not satisfying all that many people there. The reason why people want to go onto heroics, and then they suddenly realize that they've hit a brick wall in terms of difficulty, and you actually get this burnout that you're talking about here, is because the normal mode content, certainly in Wrath, to a lesser extent in Cataclysm, but I have a feeling it's going to slide back to that. We've seen evidence of it. I mean, there's been plenty of nerfs to the normal modes, both in 5-mans and in raids already. So it seems to me that they will continue to do that, and of course it's going to be made a lot easier by the fact that it'll be over-geared very shortly, thanks to Valor badges. Hey, free stuff. Wonderful, eh? Don't get that gear the normal way, just grab it from the Valor tokens, whatever the case. The problem is that you do the easy modes, as I like to call them, and you don't feel fulfilled. You've beaten the content, but it didn't matter. That's the same thing that happened with Wrath. And that's why people felt the need to go into the heroic modes, and then you ran into problems there, because the heroic modes were a massive leap in difficulty, and we're actually seeing that as well with Cataclysm. And I can provide you numbers to prove that, folks, because everybody loves numbers. Numbers are very important. So if you head over to wowprogress.com, what you'll find is some statistics. Now, the easiest boss in the entire game right now, numerically, is Magmor, that's been beaten by 46,000 guilds. However, the easiest boss in Heroics is Harfus Wormbreaker, that's been beaten by 17% of guilds. That's 8,605. And then there's a massive jump, yeah? A huge jump down to Cimarron, who is the next easiest, that's only been beaten by 5,000. So think about the difference there. That's pretty much 1 in 10 guilds that have beaten the first boss of that, in the normal modes, have not beaten the boss in the second easiest boss in the Heroics. And you're looking at maybe, well, 93.76% have beaten Magmor, and then 17.31% have beaten Harfus. There's a big drop, and there's a lot of scaling issues, it would appear. When you get through Nefarian, who's only been beaten by like 20%, and you go into Heroic Blackwing Descent, then the easiest boss you can kill is Cimarron. If you beat Bastion of Twilight, and you unlock Harfus Wormbreaker, you then have this massive drop down from Harfus to Valiona and Thoralion. It's a massive, unbelievable drop. 8,605 guilds, down to 555 for Valiona and Thoralion, then down to 136 for Ascendant Council, which is an unbelievably small number. Crazy, crazy small. And the problem is that people want to get through this stuff, and the issue is that in Wrath, they wanted to get through to that just so they could have a challenge. And that's because the normal modes were just rubbish. Yeah, they were really, really, really bad. And as a result, they're now going to heroic stuff that's actually so difficult that, yeah, they're burning out or whatever. And what they need is a curve. Yeah? There needs to be a curve, and actually, I think the problem is not progress right now. The problem is that the difficulty is all over the goddamn place. I mean, how is it okay to have that massive drop between Harfus and Valiona and Thoralion? How is that alright? Either Harfus is too easy, or Valiona and Thoralion are absurdly hard. Now, balancing the difficulty to make sure that you have this fairly steady curve where you don't have these huge roadblocks is part of good game design. And that, I think, is more important than, let's be honest, you know, this raid progression thing, and the whole point of this blog is to excuse the fact that Blizzard are not releasing Firelands at the time they said they would. That's the problem, yeah? And it's missing out so many important things, so many important factors that actually make up a good game in terms of progression. Okay. Let's go on, shall we? Raid contents, raid encounters even, to some extent nerf themselves. This is because every week the raid members acquire more and more gear. Secondarily, is that a word? I don't know, it doesn't sound like one, does it? Anyway, you could just say, secondly, the community acquires more and more knowledge and experience, which translates into better videos, strategy guides, and even UI mods, as well as just more players who've experienced the encounters firsthand. Each week that you're able to kill any bosses, your group's gear improves overall, through valor points if nothing else. When Firelands is available, everyone's gear will quickly take a step up in quality. This will give you an even better chance to beat those bosses that are blocking you now. We wouldn't be surprised to see some guilds try the first few Firelands bosses one night while using the next night to go back to get the head and chests from Nef and Cho'Gall in order to complete their set bonuses. That is until acquiring new set bonuses becomes feasible. Well, yeah, that's fine. So why are we not getting that now then? You're talking about multi-tier raiding. And the idea that, oh, we wouldn't be surprised if some guilds went back a little bit, that kind of shocks me, really, because I want to see that. I want to see loads of guilds doing that. Multi-tier raiding and being sort of between tiers is such a good thing, because it adds so much variety to your raid schedule, and it keeps you from burning out, because you're not going to the same place week in, week out, and actually going to these new places is really exciting because you're just tasting it. You're not dedicating all your time to it, you're just tasting it. Now, the longer that remains, the less and less players are going to actually get that. Because the longer you just keep it out of their reach, the more time they're going to have to spend burning out on the content you've already given them. To me, it seems that 3 raids for 6 months is unacceptable. 3 raids for about 4, it's alright. But it's going to be more like 6, maybe even 7 before Firelands actually comes out. That ain't good. That is not good at all. That is the Naxxramas situation, and it's a bit better, certainly, because there was more variety of content, but I still think that raids should be coming out sooner. Even if they are smaller raids, at least they should be coming out sooner, and it's okay to bring them out before players actually finish the other stuff, because it gives them choice, it gives them variety in their raid schedule. Anyway, on some bosses though, better armor and weapons may not be enough, because some mechanics just can't easily be outgeared. To mitigate that problem, our tendency is to nerf content over time, just to make sure a wide variety of players see it. That's rubbish. I'm sorry. It's like, well, there are just some mechanics that can't be outgeared, so, you know, we're just going to move the goalposts. Talk about contradicting what you just said. Okay, the idea that encounters nerf themselves through gear. This is okay, right? This is totally fine. This is the way it should be. However, he's ignoring the second point. And the second point is, players learn more and get better. Why? Why is he ignoring that? He just said this not 3 sentences ago. That's just stupid. So dumb. Well, they can't outgear it, and well, they're not learning, so let's nerf it. How about you just let them suffer? Oh, I know why. I know exactly why, and it comes down to subscription fees. It's as simple as that. You have to nerf the content because the people will leave, and... God. People are going to leave regardless. This is the problem, isn't it? As Blizzard continues to do this, they get themselves into a long-term spiral whereby this is actually going to hurt their business in the long run. It might not hurt it now, because you'll keep players for a little bit longer, but the kind of player that can't beat that kind of content is not going to learn, it's not going to get better, and oh god, and they're going to slide further and further and further behind. You can't nerf that much. You just can't. Over the course of several years, these players are going to get so bad and so far behind the curve that they can't do anything right. Nothing. And they are going to leave at that point. And in the meantime, you've got that compounded by the fact that people are leaving because they're sick of you nerfing content. And they're sick of, you know, being these kind of guilds that are sort of in the middle. It's like, oh, we can appease the progression guilds. Yeah, great. So you're appeasing a small minority. And then you're appeasing the really, really bad players. And then you're leaving this big gap in the middle of everybody else, which is the majority of the player base, who are sort of in the middle of the content. They might be struggling on some bosses, but they're doing fairly well. They're certainly not leaders, but they're doing all right. And they're happy with that. And they're not happy when they see their bosses nerfed to the point where they become absolutely trivial and runs become snooze fests, which is exactly what we saw in ICC. It's like going through Icecrown Citadel, where you've got 8 or 9 or even 10 bosses that are complete snooze fests, and then you've got Sinestra, who's a little bit tricky, and then of course you've got Lich King. You have to raid for several hours to get to that point, and those snooze fests suck, and Naxxramas was the same problem. Snooze fest, the entire thing. TOC, a snooze fest as well. That's the kind of thing you want to avoid. And that actually, more so than anything, causes raid burnout, because people don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. They have no desire, but they have to. You can say, oh, we can just raid lock out. No, you can't, because you won't have the gear. You've got to keep your gear progression off. The way that these instances are designed, you have to keep raiding them. That's simply the case. You can't gear up fast enough, especially not in 25-mans, to actually keep up with that if you just hold your raid lockout all the time. So, that's a terrible thing to say. God, it's upsetting. The Trailblazers get to see the fight before anyone else, but we don't lock the dungeon door behind them. You wouldn't have done that anyway. You leave the dungeon door open and people simply have to pass the barrier of entry. I'll tell you what this is. This is a nightclub. This is Blackwing Nightclub, folks. In Blackwing Nightclub, you need to have... There's a certain dress code for Blackwing Nightclub. Yeah? And the people that are savvy, and they go to nightclubs a lot, you know, they're very experienced clubbers. They know exactly what to do, and they go in there straight away, no problem, straight past the bouncers. And then you've got the guys that, maybe, they're not so great at clubbing, maybe they don't do it all that often. They're a bit casual. So they go up to the door, and, sorry, says Nefarian, who is the bouncer, inexplicably. He owns the nightclub, but he likes to get a little bit hands-on, so he says, sorry, we can't let you in without these skills and this gear. So, on your way. Proper shoes, mate. Shirt and proper shoes. No trainers. No trainers. And they leave, and they come back the next night, and hey, they're wearing the proper gear, and they've got the proper skills and the proper etiquette, and in they go. And then you've got the chavs. And the chavs are the bads. They are the bad players. They will never, ever get better, and they will keep trying. They will keep coming back to that door in their Burberry, in their trainers, in their stupid hat with their gold chains and all that nonsense, their fake tan, and Nefarian will keep turning them away, and they will keep coming back again and again and again. They will never ever learn. Now, are you telling me that Nefarian... This is a stupid analogy, by the way, if you haven't figured it out. Are you telling me that Nefarian slammed that door in the face of those people? No, he didn't. The door is still open. but it's guarded. It's got bouncers, and it has standards. What the game is asking you to do is to adhere to those standards. If you can't do that, that is your problem. It is not the game's problem, and you shouldn't slacken things up in order to allow those people in. You need to keep those standards up, because if you don't, the establishment will get worse and worse and worse, and then nobody will want to go there anymore. Actually, that's not a bad analogy at all, is it? There you go. Think about that. I haven't even gotten to the end of this. There's so much more about this. I don't think the rest of it really needs to be talked about, honestly, but that's really my conclusion. Blizzard continue on with this strategy that doesn't seem to understand what keeps people actually raiding, and also is making their player base worse and worse and worse. And that, I think, is the worst thing about this. Their player base keeps slipping and sliding, and as a long-term business strategy, it is bad, because the players will get to a point where they can't do anything right. And they will expect to be spoon-fed, and then you'll lose the hardcore, because they're not being catered to, and you'll eventually just lose the casuals anyway, because they're not real fans anyway. You know, they're not going to dedicate themselves to anything. If they could dedicate themselves to something, they'd have already beaten the content, and they wouldn't be complaining that it was too hard. My name is Total Biscuit. You're listening to Blue Please right here on CynicalBrits.com. Some Disharmonia Monday for you. It's called Losing Ground. We'll be right back after this to talk a little bit about the Dev Q&A. Enjoy.